Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do what I hope will be a fun video. It's something I've seen floating around online, and that is a video talking about some of my favorite horror books that other people don't seem to love. I looked at Goodreads and sorted by Goodreads ratings, and I found the books that I personally love that had the lowest ratings on the list, and so I want to share them with you. So these are books that I like that the rest of the internet does not. Hopefully you'll get some good recommendations here if you share some of my unpopular opinions. All that being said, let's get started. So the first one I want to talk about is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This, of course, is a story that follows a father and father who are going off to vacation with their young adopted daughter, Wen. And when they're at the cabin, they are approached by a group of strangers who insist on coming in the house. They say that the world is about to end and they need their help. This is a book I don't like to give away too much in terms of synopsis. I think most people are aware of it because it's pretty buzzy, but wow, does it have low ratings? And I do understand why, even though again, I obviously personally loved it, otherwise it wouldn't be in this video. So for me, I love the relationship between the fathers, and particularly their love for their daughter. I got very emotionally attached to the characters and just loved how intimate and quiet and claustrophobic the story was, because I found it to be very intense. I worried very deeply for the characters again because I was invested in them, and I loved the ending. But I understand that for a lot of people the ending is what broke the story for them, because it's just not quite what you might expect. It's an ending that I personally love to see in fiction, especially in horror, but other people do not like when this happens. And again, I'm trying to be vague on purpose, so I do understand why other people don't like it, but for me it totally hit home. It's also very short, so it's very clean narrative. I love books that could get to the point and go there, and yeah, I love this one. So hopefully some of you do as well. I definitely want to hear in the comments which of you share my unpopular opinions here. Next, we have Ghost Radio by Leopoldo Galt, which is a story that follows a young Mexican man who goes about creating a radio TV show where he interviews various people about their experiences with ghosts and their paranormal activity. And this is largely based off of a radio show that he heard when he was recovering in the hospital from a terrible accident that killed his family. Through that accident, he ended up befriending another boy who also was in the same boat. So the story is told over a few different timelines, one being the present day where he is creating this radio show, and then we also get flashbacks to the past leading up to them. And I really like this book now, but I also completely understand why it has such low ratings, because the first time I read it, I found it to be very slow and very meandering, and I was kind of getting bored, if I'm honest, at the beginning. I have read it since multiple times, and now I absolutely love it, but I love it because I know what the story is building towards, and I appreciate the slow burning journey along the way. So this is a book that I really encourage you to listen to on audio because, again, of the radio experience. And for me, I don't think I would have loved it as much if I had read it on the page, but oh my goodness, the performance is fantastic by Pedro Pascal, and I just fell in love with this one. It is spooky and creepy, and it got into my head and felt very psychological. I normally do not like ghost stories because I am someone who does not believe in ghosts, but this one pulled me right in, and I found the stories fascinating because within the main story you also have these people calling into the radio show, so you almost get these little short stories sprinkled within there, which again is something I normally do not like, but in this case I thought it worked oh so well. But I'll be honest, I almost DNF'd this book the first time I read it, and I'm so glad I pushed through because the ending, in my opinion, was something I loved. I thought it was just wonderful and smart and something that I really enjoy seeing again in horror. But again, I do understand why other people did not love this book as much as I did. I do think that this is a book that benefits from rereading, so for those of you that liked it but didn't love it, maybe give it another chance. Definitely do the audio if you didn't the first time around, and hopefully you fall in love with it the same way I did. Next, we have The Apartment by S.L. Gray. This follows a couple who experienced a home invasion, and so in order to get away and have a fresh start, they go on a vacation. They can't really afford a proper one in a hotel, so instead they decide to do more of a house swap situation. So they go off to Paris and they rent this apartment from this other couple. When they get there, things are just not quite right. The apartment just seems a little bit off and just isn't as clean as it should be. There's just something not quite right about it, and the story spirals from there. This is a book that I very much think does not work for a lot of people because of expectations. Because going into it, I thought it was going to be a classic haunted house story, and I'll say that it's not. Instead, it's much more of a psychological story about the breakdown of this family, and it really delves into their past and the history of what happened leading up to the invasion. And it's just very subtle, very quiet. So again, if you're looking for a really spooky, crazy story with a lot of action and excitement, you're not necessarily going to get that here. But if you're looking for a good character study, where again, it really examines characters' actions and the results and fallout of that, it deals with grief and some unexpected issues that I did not see coming, but I really loved. So I ended up really enjoying it, maybe because I don't like haunted house stories, so I was delighted to find something else happening in the book. And again, I think this one really comes down to expectations, because if I had known what it was, I would have gone into it, expecting something different. And I gotta say, I was really happy with what I personally got, because again, it's the kind of story I like to read when it comes to horror. And then for similar reasons, I want to talk about Mind of Winter by Laura Kashiki. This story is told over Christmas on a blizzarding day. We follow a mother who is spending the day with her daughter while her husband goes out to collect the family members from the airport and bring them home. She is plagued by this thought that something followed them home from Russia, and you find out that years ago their daughter was adopted from a Russian orphanage, and she has this feeling that something followed them home. And this is a story that is very, very repetitive. So again, I understand why people do not like it, because the phrase "something followed us home from Russia" is said over and over and over again. And I listened to this one on audio, which, as you know, if you listen to audio, if there is a phrase that is overused in a book, you will definitely notice it when you have a narrator saying those words to you as opposed to reading it on the page. So I did find that to be a little bit much, but I understand why the author was doing that. And again, it was being done very purposely. It's supposed to build and build and be this gnawing thing that just the character will not drop, and it's very slow moving. And again, this is a book that is technically classified as horror, but I think for a lot of people's traditional ideas of what a horror book is, this book may not necessarily fit that bill. I think other people will describe it as like suspense or thriller and all of that, and it just depends on how you interpret it, basically. And for me, I thought this book was super dark and super messed up and had a really disturbing ending. But again, it's really going to depend on your expectations going into it. I think this book particularly will appeal to parents, because it definitely again deals with the themes of adoption, which I thought were really fascinating. But again, one that is probably really different than people's expectations, with a lot of repetitive sentences that will probably drive some readers nuts. But if you can get past that, I think this book is pretty great. Next, we have Dare Me by Megan Abbott, and this is actually a YA thriller that has terrible ratings, so not actually horror but thriller, but I thought I'd throw it in here anyway because I do really enjoy this book, but I understand why a lot of people do not. This follows a group of cheerleaders who get a new coach who pushes them too far. The one cheerleader gets entangled with the coach's business and finds out something that they should not, and the story goes from there. And I will say that it's just a very unique story. It's very different than most YA thrillers or most thrillers in general. And it's much more, again, about the characters and the mystery itself. In some ways, it's very predictable, but again, I think it's more, for me, about the characters, and it has an amazing narrative rhythm. I do think that Megan Abbott is an amazing writer when it comes to prose, which is not something I always appreciate. So I love this one, but I also will admit that I do think it's quite flawed. I've read it many times. I've never been able to give it like a full 5 stars because I can see the plot holes, I can see the places where the book is weak, and I do think you can tell it's one of her earlier books, but there's something about it that just draws me back in. I love the wickedness of girls doing bad things, and just there's something so cutting about this book that it really appealed to me. I'm a sucker for a mean girl story, and this one, in my opinion, is pretty much the ultimate mean girl's tale. Next up, we have Tales from a Talking Board, edited by Ross Lockhart, and this is a collection of short stories, which that alone is probably the reason it's so poorly rated, because as is always the case with a horror anthology of short stories, some are going to work better for some readers than others. I really enjoyed most of the stories in this collection, which is pretty rare for me. All the stories are centered around playing with Ouija boards, which happens to be one of my favorite tropes in horror, so unsurprisingly, I love this one a lot. And I think it really, again, comes down to expectations, because because a lot of the authors take some really creative liberties with the topic, and so they're not all very classic. Some of them aren't necessarily scary, although I will say one of my scariest short stories ever is in this collection by Matthew Bartlett, and I really recommend that one. So yeah, this is one that I really love, but I also totally understand why it doesn't necessarily get as much love as, say, a traditional novel. Next, we have Here There Be Monsters by Amanda Berube, and this is another piece of YA horror, which maybe is why it has lower ratings. But this follows a girl whose younger sister goes missing. Their family contacts the police, and the story is about them trying to find her sister. The story, of course, involves her trying to look for her sister, following the events leading up to her disappearance. Her sister was very weird. She never really fit in school, and she was really obsessed with imaginary play, which her older sister understandably was kind of growing out of now that she had her own group of friends and was more following into that crowd. And this is a story that I almost compare to something like Bridge to Terabithia because of those imaginary play elements, but it's definitely horror. And I will say that I found the characters to be really annoying. There's a lot of focus on her friend group and the boys she likes and all of that, which is not my thing, especially as an adult reader. I just don't tend to love that. But I kept listening because I was doing the audiobook and I kept following along, and I gotta say that I really loved the ending. It surprised me, and I thought it was really solid and definitely bumped up the book in my opinion. So it's one that's just a little bit different, a little bit woodsy and folklory, and yeah, I just loved where it went. So I appreciate the fact that the journey there is imperfect. It's not a 5-star read by any means for me, but I kind of loved it. And last, we have Beneath by Christy DeMeester, and this is a book that is set in a small southern town. We follow a journalist who is sent to this town in order to investigate a church that does snake handling. They are very reluctant to do so because they have a really difficult relationship with religious institutions, but they get pulled into the story. One of the girls in the town is undergoing her initiation into the church, which involves holding the snake, and the snake ends up biting her. And so possibly she gets possessed, there might be more going on, and they may have awoken some kind of cosmic evil. And this is a story that I really loved, and I loved it so much because it was a very cutting story. It deals with some really difficult subject matter, content warnings for sexual violence, and so many other forms of abuse. So I can see for those reasons alone, that might be part of the reason that this book is poorly rated. It's just that a lot of people be turned off by an author, especially a female author, writing about these things. I do think in another author's hands, these could have been really mishandled, these elements, but in Christy DeMeester's hands, I thought that she did a fantastic job. And again, this book is uncomfortable and cutting, and I really loved it. So I'll be honest, I don't really understand why the ratings are so low. I will admit that I don't think the narrative is perfect. You can tell it's her debut novel, but it was still a really solid read for me, one of my favorites, and I really would love to see that Goodreads rating rise up because I definitely think that the book deserves a lot more 4 and 5-star reviews, in my opinion. So that is it for this video here. I would love to hear from all of you of the books I talked about. Are there any that you're planning on checking out for yourself? Have I enticed you to look beyond the bad Goodreads ratings? And if you have a chance on your phone, you can go to Goodreads and sort your lists by average Goodreads rating, and you can see which of your books are the least or lowest rated, and from there do let me know which are some books that you love that have terrible ratings on Goodreads, because I love hearing about unpopular opinions. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror and thrillers as well as science fiction, fantasy, mostly adult with a few exceptions here and there. And you can help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online. If you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss another video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.